Okay, while they set up, we have 5 members of our Facilities Advisory Committee here tonight to present the preliminary recommendations. We also have representatives from EUA and Findorf that are available to, answer any questions as well, and actually provide a little bit of comment. So before we begin, just to clarify the materials that the board have, tonight, as far as hard copies, there are 3 things that were placed at your tables. The actual written recommendation, which is a 5 or 6 page document, and then the supplemental materials. One was just stuff you've seen before with regard to the previous long-range facilities plan, summary recommendations and the Facilities Advisory Committee, and then a whole packet of supplemental information. Again, many of these things you've seen before. So tonight, our committee is going to actually present slides that represent all the materials that are here, but hopefully in a concise way. So we had asked that they be allowed to present it in its entirety, and then we'll make sure we have plenty of opportunity at the end for questions, comments, and dialogue. And we'll also, when we get to the end, we'll talk a little bit about next steps in the process and how we're going to proceed as a board with that. I have some questions for you as well about how you'd like to proceed. So keep that in mind as we move through.
Dan, I'm really sorry. So when I looked at this earlier, there were a couple. I just wanted to clarify the ones that you've just given us. Were those the ones that have been added more recently?
Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. So the initial draft, there were 2 drafts posted to the board docs. Okay. As we updated those 2 documents on board docs turned into 3, but it's the same information. So if you looked at the original stuff that was posted on Friday, nothing has changed, other than the word draft came off.
So the draft.
I think the one that was originally posted said version 4, or does it say draft?
This one says draft 4. The one.
Without draft is identical. We just confirmed that
okay.
Nothing changed.
Okay, so if I've read this.
Yes, there's no new information.
Thank you. And then the others, that's a preliminary report, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then,
the recommendations. The preliminary report are the slides that you're going to see that are essentially the same slides that were in the other materials, but in order to present. Right. So, and then you were also given an additional document for notes, to follow along tonight.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
So, this one I had.
Yep.
This one I didn't.
Correct. So that is a compilation of.
So this is new. I haven't ever seen this before until right now.
Yeah, it's the same slides. It's just put in order in a slideshow.
And this is just a summary from the previous long range.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So I would just encourage board members to please record questions along the way so that we can bring those back into discussion. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. All right.
Okay. So we're going to present to you our preliminary recommendation. I thought we would start by introducing ourselves. So I'm Meg Kramars. I live in Monona. I have a 2nd grader and a 4th grader at Winqua.
I'm Joeyama Miller. I am a Monona resident. I've been in the resident here for over 40 years. All of our children have gone to school here, and I've also served on a variety of committees over those years that I've been in the district.
My name is Pat Howell. I'm a resident of Monona. I have been since 1990, and my children and grandkids are students of Monona, and I've been a teacher in the district.
Hi, I'm Patty Parrott. I'm a Cottage Grove resident with a 3rd grader in Cottage Grove School and a 6th grader in Glacial Drumlin.
Jason McCutcheon, Cottage Grove, and I've got a junior.
Okay, and the rest of our committee members are listed here. There was 20 of us, 10 from each district, or from each city in the district. And tonight we're going to talk about process, the needs, the options that we reviewed, and then as well as the cost, tax impact, and some key issues that were discussed in our meetings. process, the board, you all here, charged us with some key responsibilities. We have completed numbers 1 through 5 years. We've gone through the background data, most of which you have in front of you. Looked at the different options that were presented to us. We had some great discussion on all of these. And right now we're doing our preliminary recommendations. See you all. So we have, to date, met 7 times over the last 4 months. Like I said, we have looked at all the different data. We've had great presentations from in regards to projection enrollments and different building options, and we've had some really good discussion around how we're analyzing the different facilities, and that includes that we want facilities to offer a welcoming and engaging environment. We want them to provide space for future enrollment growth. The facilities should represent a good value, and that they should be equitable and aligned with community values. We also identified some needs that our facilities in our district have over the next 10 to 20 years. So the chart here that you have also in front of you it identifies the capacity. It's our capacity chart. So right now it doesn't include any open enrollment numbers. This is just like actual residents of Monona, and it's based on an average of the projections that were given to the committee. So it shows here that in 2019-20, Taylor Prairie is going to be over capacity, as well as Cottage Grove and Gloucester Drumlin within the next 5 years. So that's, and then the high school is also going to be over capacity potentially in 2029. So we definitely have some need for additional capacity in the district. Also talked about some priority maintenance needs. And there was an extensive facilities review process, and the district identified $16.4 million in priority maintenance needs. The slide here shows that it's how much money is needed for maintenance items broken down by the different buildings in the district. And then the next one shows where they're needed. And you can see this is the roof repairs, plumbing, HVAC. They're not just like things that would be great to have, things that we want. They're things that ensure the facilities can continue to run safely and efficiently for all the students in the district. Also talked about making sure that that there's consistency across the district, so that we think 5th graders would be best served in an elementary setting. So we should try our best to get them out of GDS. And that was overwhelmingly the position of the committee, that 5th graders would be better served in an elementary setting. So that was another need that we identified from our facilities, as well as flexible spaces. So students today do a lot of collaborative small group learning. We also talked about the fact that teaching and learning practices change dramatically, and they change very quickly. And so it would be great to make sure that we have spaces in our buildings that can be flexible and that can be adaptable to whatever the next big thing is in the teaching routine. And then athletics is, there's some big challenges there that our kids are being kind of sent all over the place because we don't have facilities for them to use for their training and their practices and games. So, and we based that on the long-term facilities planning committee work that went really in depth into the needs of the athletic facility. So you're very familiar with the needs of that. So that's just what we touched on, the kind of high level where the needs are. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joe.
Thank you. So this may look quite complicated, as those of us on the committee were having to look at different options, and we broke them up basically looking at option A, C1, and C3 as neighborhoods, and what would that mean to be a neighborhood school. We also looked at options and discussion really regarding grade transitions, which meaning that all students within the district will transition according to grade and not by neighborhoods or by territory. And so we developed the different kinds of options. So we had B, we had C2, and C4. And in our discussion, we also then created a hybrid, which was D. Not only did we look at these options carefully and relate to the academics and the transitions, we also had to think as we continued to develop it, what would be those costs and things like that. And those 7 options, we're always looking at 4K through the 8 level first. And so the similarities and all the options was, as Meg pointed out, is that there was a consensus by the committee that 5th graders belong at the elementary level district-wide. If you look at some of the options under the grades, and you'll see, we even looked at, can we create school districts according to community, meaning all Monona students stay in Monona, and what would that mean? And so you'll see those circles where we have those options were also discussed. We came to the conclusion that based on the projections and additional capacity, that a new elementary school would probably have to be built or be considered in Cottage Grove. All the schools were looked at in regarding renovations and addition, and also at the high school. We looked at all the same athletic plan would come into this option, because at this point we're just looking at the total picture, not breaking down in terms of priority and other options that may come up in future meetings after input from the community or feedback from the board. All fund the pool $16.1 million in priority capital maintenance needs. Because at this point, the committee has felt and has heard that these maintenance needs cannot continue to be put off without having really delirious consequences. We spent a lot of time on grade configurations and the implications of attendance boundaries, the impact of bringing Maywood back online as a district school. And in early January, we eliminated option A, C1, C2, and C3, i.e. the neighborhood schools. The discussion was that having to develop boundaries and other issues may cause more problems than just creating while we might all like to have our children go to neighborhood schools. The consequences of neighborhood schools may bring in more problems, more costs, and some other things. So in late January, when we met again, we looked at option C4, which is a great transition, but it's identifying a different way of setting up the grades, including keeping that Maywood option open to us. And primarily the committee felt that the cost of it was a little bit more than we were willing to consider at this point. And so at that point, we eliminated C4. So some of our preliminary recommendations was look at option B as our primary, but we would also keep option B online. And the primary reasons for these recommendations is that option B allowed for that additional capacity. It expanded 4A and K to meet long-term enrollment projections. It addresses the issue of the primary capital needs at the $16.4 million. It gave us the flexibility because we could remodel these existing schools to create that more flexible learning environment, expand core spaces, and create more equity between the schools and the communities. And at this point for athletics, we could centralize practice in competitive fields and reduce the use of shared facility. Option D is quite similar, except that Taylor Prairie and Cottage Grove are structured at the 4K to 2 level. So these were our preliminary recommendations. Just keep option B. So Taylor Prairie would be 4K to K, Cottage Grove 1 to 2. The new school would be for all 3rd to 5th graders in Cottage Grove. All middle school students from Monona as well as Cottage Grove would go to Glacial Drummond. Monona students would stay at Winnicott, going from 4K to 5th grade. And then the high school would be at Monona Grove, 9 through 12. And then we would have MG21 school for 9 through 12 as that alternative path. One of the benefits of looking at option B was that all of Cottage Grove remains together. There's no divisive boundaries to implement. The entire grade level staff is in one community, can plan together, because the students would be, and the teachers would all be at one school. On the other hand, there are a few more transitions, which means less opportunity for mentoring and less stability in some school communities for example, the PTO. But I think this would lend itself to future discussions by the committee. At this point, I'm going to turn the slide over to our professionals, and they're going to be able to tell us exactly what some of those renovations might be. This is a legend that they're going to be talking about, so I'll ask Bob or.
Oh, clever.
Okay.
Excellent.
But they're a light blue, a darker blue, and an orange. So pay attention.
Wow. Nice, Joe. Well, first off, again, Bob Weigert from Epstein Union Architects. Glad to be here. The committee did a great job, and thank you all for coming tonight and presenting. You're doing a fabulous job. For a second there, Joe, I didn't think I was going to have to continue. I thought you were going to for me. Joe kind of ran through the option that the committee is considering. I'm just going to show you again the plans that you've seen before, probably a year or so ago. Again, these are preliminary ideas. The key that you see on the screen shows you what those colors mean on the plans. So the light blue is a light renovation. If you think of that more as like finishes, we're going to go in and paint the walls, change out the flooring and the ceiling. Very light, we're not tearing down walls. That's really the blue, the dark blue is where we're getting into heavy renovation, removing walls, things like that. And then the orange is new construction. Where do I need this? Oh, sorry, I'm hitting the laser. Okay, there we go. So I'll go through these. You'll notice on the right-hand side that the scenario key, if you will, or the preliminary option is shown there. So at Taylor Prairie, what we're looking at doing is creating a link at the back of the building. So you've got that horseshoe configuration right now. We're looking at creating a loop through so that there's good circulation. You'll notice there's some boxes shown there. We're showing some potential collaboration spaces being constructed in that area for those kindergartners. And then like I had mentioned, the light blue is a light renovation, the dark blue is a heavy renovation. So we're looking at, again, some of the spaces, for instance, the stage, trying to do something with that so it's a little bit more usable. And then, like I said, the lighter areas, we've got the cafeteria and things like that. And again, these are preliminary ideas that we've looked at a few years back after we walked through with building principals and identified some areas that might be up for renovation. When we look at Cottage Grove, you'll notice that there's a lot of dark blue here. And if you think about what we're doing with that building, and if you've walked through that building, and if you remember the facilities study, there was a lot of identified work in there. This one in particular, we are looking at doing more of movement of walls, if you will, trying to open that up, create those flexible learning spaces, those visual connections between spaces. The other areas that you'll notice is down by the cafeteria. That whole area is dark blue. We're looking at expanding the cafeteria, making it really twice as big as it is, almost going back to probably what it originally was designed for. Same thing with the library, thinking about what is that now compared to what is it, currently, what should it be? So we're looking at a lot of renovation work there. The newer section, kind of to the south east, is relatively good shape. So we're showing that in light blue. So we're just doing finishes really in that area. You'll also notice that there is a little bit of an orange bar, kind of at the front entry here. And one of my first visits to the building was driving up and thinking that the rotunda that's at the end was the entrance, and realizing that it was in back of me and needing to go back. So what we're looking at is trying to make that entrance a little bit more inviting, a little bit more prominent. So that's what that piece is. The new elementary school, you've heard about that. We're showing, again, this is a preliminary idea. There's a shape to a building, but we have not laid anything out. That's a square foot block that kind of represents what that building would look like. We're starting to show some parking and some traffic flow around it and some playground area, but again, this is very preliminary. It's more of a block diagram, if anything. When we get to Winnequa, again, we're looking at some light renovation and heavy renovation. Here again, you'll notice that there's a bar of orange off of the one wing connecting up the other wing. What we're looking at doing there again is creating a loop around the building so that there's easy circulation from one end to the next. So you're not going from the IMC all the way back around and then going down on the other wing. So that is a big improvement. The other thing that you'll notice is that big block of space by the kindergarten area, that is the library. There's spaces in there, computer labs that we're looking at renovating and really bringing up to modern day learning environments. We're also looking at renovating the cafeteria space, and also we've got the gymnasium showing kind of light renovation as well. The other thing real quickly on this one that we're looking at doing is flipping where the office is, and I think we had talked about this once before. When you walk in the building, there is a buzzer that buzzes you in, but once you're past the vestibule doors, you really have access to the building. So what we're looking at doing is moving the office area to this block here so that we can create a secure access point where you enter into the office, check in, and then gain access to the school. So there's a little bit of shuffle that we're anticipating would happen at the front entryway. Again, this isn't design, it's just a concept at this point. Glacial Drumlin, we are looking at the collaboration spaces, I'll call them, in the grade wings, looking at what can those spaces be. They're pretty wide open now. In concept, those are great ideas, and we do put those in. The problem, a lot of times, when those were created, is the furniture to really utilize them was never put in. So what we're looking at is opening those areas up a little bit more, doing something different with them. We're also talking about taking the classrooms that line that area and creating some additional visibility into that space so that teachers can be in one space and still see in the next. You'll also notice that there's some orange areas here, specifically up by the cafeteria. So we're showing some light blue and some dark blue. We're talking about heavily renovating the kitchen. If you think about the servering and how that whole serving line works, we're looking at redoing that. We're also looking at adding on to the cafeteria and expanding that space out. So that's what that orange and dark blue represents. The other orange bar that's just to the south of the gym, we've got a 2-story piece there that we're looking at. Obviously the gym's on the upper level. So what we're thinking about doing there is more of a fitness center. And then depending on how this all pans out, the spaces down below could be special type classes, or we might end up moving some other things around within the grade wings. It really depends on programming once we get that far. But we do have programming already scheduled for that. At the high school, again, you heard from a capacity standpoint, probably in about 10 years or so, based on the projections, you may have some growth issues there. The drawing that we're showing right now, within your drawing has some dashed lines. Again, we're thinking about long-term where could an addition go with some academic space. We're not necessarily showing it in orange here. That would be something that would be in the future. What we are showing here, however, that would be moving forward potentially with this option are some interior renovations, again, to the IMC, to the fitness and weight areas up on the second floor. And then we're also doing an expansion by the theater for some storage and receiving back in that area. You heard a little bit about the athletic fields. Again, we've got a list of things that we've included within the options and within some of the maintenance pieces, and those are shown here. One thing I'll point out, this one field in the middle that says stormwater management, we are not creating a pond there. That's basically saying we've got a stormwater management issue and that area needs to be addressed. There'll be some grading and piping and things like that put in. So you're not necessarily losing any athletic field, it's just pointing out that there's some work that needs to be done for stormwater management. And then finally, when we look at the site adjacent to Glacial Drumlin, and you saw this image before with just the school and the parking and the athletic fields and such, the additional space that we have on that site could accommodate these pieces. So we're showing some baseball, some softball. We've got not necessarily a competition track, but a running track with a soccer field in between, and then some practice fields, and potentially some field activities as well. Again, we wanted to take a look at the site to see what we could fit on that site. Whether or not all that moves forward, that's really up to you long term, but that's pretty much what you can fit on the site. Who's up next?
I have the last slide here. So the last slide that I'm responsible for is called an additional consideration. This is just a clear, again, the option B, where it says that in Cottage Grove, Taylor Prairie would have 4K to 2, and Cottage Grove would have 4K to 2. You would have everybody then going to the new school at 3 to 5, going on to Glacial Drummond at 6 to 8, and then Monona Grove High School or MG21. Winnequa, Monona students would remain the same. We did not throw out this option as a committee because we felt that we needed to continue to look at it and to see what might, with further discussion from the board or from the community, that people might like to do this because it allowed for one fewer transition. We also were told about transitions are important to children. But we also saw that there might have been some other considerations to think about as well. The implementation of boundaries in Cottage Grove, if you have two schools having the same grade level, to be able to do that. It could be a potential for divisiveness. There could be some social demographic and or economic inequities if you don't do it just right, which is very difficult to do. And also the Cottage Grove staff would be split between two schools. And we thought that we would like to hear a little bit back from the teachers and some other kinds of things to do. We also felt that we would like to at least toss this out and see what the school board members might like to think about, and or if we put it out as an option for the community as well. And with that, I'm going to give it over to Pat, who will talk to you in the next series of slides.
Okay. And so what I'm going to talk about is just the preliminary costs and tax impact, and these slides kind of speak for themselves. And I was out of town and not able to meet with people, so they gave me this easy job of putting these up here. So the first one is the preliminary costs for option B, and some of this we've already gone through, but this just breaks it down. The costs for the new elementary school, what the remodeling costs are for each of the buildings, and of course Maywood's not included in that. So we've got a total remodel estimate, and then the priority needs that were talked about previously, and then the athletics at both the high school and the elementary school too. And as we looked at this, it was very helpful in the process too to have the opportunity to tour the schools, have the principals lead us through that, and have the consultants join us in that process. So I think that provided a lot of insights for us in the process. Then the next one is the maintenance costs, and again, this is a breakdown too that we've had a chance to look at already, but the priority maintenance items for 2019 for all of the schools, including the district office and MG21 in this one as well, what's needed in the next 2 to 5 years, and then on to the next 6 to 10 years, and then MG21 to be determined in the future. And then final is the athletic breakdown. So, and taking a look at the high school costs, looking at the cost for the football field, tennis courts, and the track field. And then also some estimating with the new elementary school and looking at competition baseball fields, baseball practice, various sport practice fields, just developing the site, soccer competition fields, softball competition, and track. So with our total of a range of 13,455,000 up to 14,835,000.
There was one thing
Yeah,
you
you
weren't
want to
here,
add?
that
No,
you
I
weren't
wasn't.
here earlier, but
Okay.
I think one of the concepts that came out of why would we need any of these upgrades and things like that is, at the current time, we were told as a committee that our fields are inadequate to support larger competitions, whether it be football or baseball and whatever. This would allow us to have those kinds of conference tournaments or district-wide, whatever the regional ones to be able to do, which then can also bring some additional revenue into our programs and things like that. And so this is why we were given that really high and lows if we went to it, and then the committee would then be able to go in the future meetings to break down and see what is, what would be the discussions going forward. But at that point, we did not know as a committee that many of the high school facilities were so inadequate that they could not be allowed at all under the WIAA to run tournaments or anything else.
Just one thing to add to this as well, I think when we're thinking of athletics, it's really easy to think about it at the high school level, but what this preliminary recommendation does is it also opens up facilities for our elementary students throughout the district as well. So having kids in that age range, that's something that there's a shortage of too, but I know whenever we talk athletics, our mind instantly goes to high school, keeping in mind this is for all of our students across the age levels.
And it allows them to practice and perform at one site, not spread out throughout the other sites throughout the two communities.
All right, so since the committee did an excellent job of walking through the process and looking at all the different things that they considered, we also wanted to talk about, obviously the cost, but then also what that tax impact looks like. And what this first scenario shows like, and this is obviously all preliminary, and as you will hear from the committee, next steps is these are not final recommendations. You will go through a community survey, and based on the feedback from the community survey, based on the final recommendation from the committee, and then the final approval by this board, these numbers definitely can change. But we wanted to be able to look at these as, as we were making decisions or as they were making decisions. So as we looked at those number of options, we costed those out, and we have option A, a low and a high, option B, a low and a high, and all the way through our hybrid of option D. This is using the total borrowing that we had looked at each of them, so that included building the new school, the capital maintenance projects, and the additions or remodeling for the flexible spaces, and the athletics. So like I said before, that doesn't mean that this is the final dollar amount. Some of those things could be included and not. As we walk through our operational referendum, there's two types of ways that taxes are impacted in these types of projects. Obviously, this is talking about debt, so this would be for us going out and especially getting voter approval to issue debt to build something or to remodel, which has an end date to it. It's allowing us to go out and start construction. So you can see from each of these, and we're looking at fair market value, that's in the highest mill rate this would be. So if we were to go with option B and ended up saying that the borrowing was 82 million to 88 million, we're looking at a highest mill rate of 0.78 up to a 0.91 per $1,000 of fair market value, and then we give 4 scenarios down below. We're using the highest because the way that school financing works is obviously if we spend more money, and as a negative aided school district, we do potentially lose some aid. And so we can't say, well, the first year this is what it's going to look like. The other part of it is our state budgets are on 2-year cycles. So what we have to do is we have to make some assumptions that, equalization aid is going to be at this. And obviously when we do borrowing for construction projects, it's typically over 20 years. We're not in a position that we're making any type of recommendation at this point for referendum. We don't know what the interest rate's going to look like. So there's a lot of moving parts. So we wanted to be able to give you a good idea of what this would possibly look like, but obviously not coming in and saying these are guaranteed dollar amounts. So this scenario is showing on the side of things if we were to, go and issue debt for building a new school and the remodeling and the athletics. The second part of opening a new school is also operational. So this is very similar to our operational override that we did a couple of years ago at the 2.6. The reason this would have to happen is when you open a new school, there are certain positions that obviously need to be in place. When we move, teachers are based off of enrollment. So if we move 50 students out of one building, typically the same equivalent number of, based on board policy, those number of teachers are coming with. However, when we're looking at operating a school, we have administration, we have administrative assistants, we have buildings and grounds, we have food service, and we have some of those student services that don't directly gets increased with student enrollment alone. And so that's why we're looking at two different scenarios, and one obviously is if we were to open up 2 new schools, and the other one was to open up 1 new school. So if you look at scenario 1, which aligns with the preliminary recommendation, we're looking at an override of about $840,000 to $930,000, and you can see this would be the additional mill rate increase on top of the debt. Obviously, you know, we have the $2.6 million referendum out there. That's going to sunset in the future. We need to talk about what that's going to look like. But what we're doing right now is this is identifying what positions and what we believe that cost would be to open up a new elementary school in the Cottage Grove area. Patty?
Okay. So we've gone over the preliminary recommendations and some of the costs. We wanted to spend a little bit of time going over some of the other topics that our committee discussed in detail, and that'll give you a little bit more insight to why we ruled out some of the options that we did. We spent a lot of time, before I get to that, to echo what the rest of the committee has said. You know, again, these are all very preliminary. It's our first draft. We'll get to next steps, but, you know, again, as we go to those next steps, we thought it was important that everyone understands the work that's been done to this point. So we did discuss Maywood extensively, and I know there was some concern about why we were discussing extensively. There were some new members on the committee, and as we were out talking to people in the community, Maywood came up a lot. And so we did want to make sure that we did due diligence on that topic. Ultimately, Maywood is not a viable option. It has a limited capacity of about 300 students, and not to mention that capacity is in Monona, and as you could tell by those enrollment numbers, the capacity problem is in Cottage Grove, not Monona, so it's not solving that problem. Second, as you saw by the operational slides that Jared just showed us, it really creates an extra operational burden for us, so it really creates skyrocketing operational costs. And then there's some of the basic things. To remodel it, to bring it up to speed, to be consistent with what we would expect for our students is a significant investment. Not to mention it's not currently structured in a way that delivers the type of education we want our students to have. You know, we discussed, could it be a viable junior high? But if we look at the type of science programming, for example, that we deliver at Glacial Drumlin, it would create a significant investment in Maywood for us to be able to do that. So again, we just took Maywood off the table and out of all of our options. Another question people like to ask, especially those that have never been in this building, is why don't we move everyone back into Nichols? And again, not an available option because it currently is in use. Obviously with the district offices and with MG21, there is not currently any space to bring any grade levels or additional grade levels back into this building. Finally, Monona Grove High School, obviously we're currently under capacity, but we do recommend that the board keeps this under close watch because if you recall from that chart, we will have capacity issues here in about 10 years' time. And then as they showed, they do have some thoughts for additions in the future, but that's considered outside of the scope of this project currently. So the last thing you could do, other than what we've already talked about, is nothing. And the committee feels really strongly that this is not a viable option as well, because there's certainly a cost to doing nothing too, right? First of all, if we do nothing, we will be over capacity in 3 of our schools in 5 years. So what are you going to do with those students? We're going to put them in a trailer in the parking lot? There will be nowhere for those students to go in as little as 5 years. So we feel like the time to act is now. In addition to that, thinking just about where to put the kids, the strain that it puts on the educational system is enormous. What we'd be asking of our students and of our teachers, we don't feel that that's something fair to ask of our community and our staff that works hard to educate our students. The deterioration of the district buildings. So we looked at that $16.4 million number. And it's my understanding that 2 years ago you looked at that number and it was $14 million. And so all we know for certain is that number is just going to keep on going up. If we don't do something now, you know, a roof that needs to be repaired might cave in. We don't know. We have to act on those maintenance needs, and we need to do that now. We also know that construction and financing never gets cheaper, so it's just going to continue to go up. Again, the cost of doing nothing now will only be more expensive tomorrow. And That relates back to that additional deferred maintenance cost. Again, if we do nothing now, it's only gonna have to cost us in the long run. I think that's all my part, right? So with that, I'm gonna pass it over. What's that?
Just flip it ahead to here. That'll be the opposite.
Okay.
Good.
Pass it over to Jason to talk about timelines.
Yeah, so, as we get done here, we start wrapping up and start doing things. The chart that you can see here is, we're in the middle of February, so this is where we come back with our preliminary recommendation to you. We, already got a couple community listening sessions scheduled. The first one is next week, and then there's one the week after that. So we've got those coming up so that we can inform the public of, what we're talking about, what we're trying to do, what we're recommending, what you guys are thinking about potentially doing down the road, just to make this as open and transparent as possible. And I guess that's a key that was reiterated numerous times as we went through these discussions was, make this as open and transparent as humanly possible. Not everybody's going to get all the information or see all of the details, but try to provide as much as we can. And so some of that will come out through your community survey. We've heard good things about the company that you've hired to do that, so that's why this information that you've got in this 35 pages here will hopefully guide you down that process of getting good, solid questions and answers to that. And then in mid-May, we all get back together again, hear the results of that survey. The committee will come up with a final recommendation for you then by the end of May, first part of June. And we'll move forward from there so that you guys can decide what kind of actions you're going to take at that point, whether things progress along the timelines to a potential referendum or referendums, depending on what you decide you want to do. So, that being said, one of the unique things is that tonight we get a good chance to ask questions and give you more feedback on the specifics that you've got. So the 5 of us are here to give you what the consensus of the group was, and also we have, the experts that are with us. So I guess now, fire away.
Peter?
Thanks for all the detail, getting into all the details. I have a couple of questions. First one is, to go back to the options configuration slides, the one that shows the 7 options. Can we flip back there? That's the one. You kind of recommended that, you recommend D, and then also hold on to D. I look at A and D, and I see a lot of similarities in that we have 3 transitions, we have neighborhood schools, we have districts, but I do see that A is $7 million cheaper.
If you look,
Could you elaborate on why you chose D over A?
sure, if you look very closely, the config in option A1, it goes in Cottage Grove 4K to K, 1 to 5 at Cottage Grove School, 1 to 5 at the new elementary school, and then everybody over at 6A. B, which is about this, it goes 4 to, all of Cottage Grove will be 4K to K, 1 to 2, all at 3 to 5, and 6 and 8. And
I'm asking you to compare A and D.
And A and D, and the difference being is that there's, in the D, as I mentioned before, it's 4K to 2, and then 3 to 5. You have divisions of boundaries when you have 2 schools with the same grade level.
Yes, but so does option A.
But,
yeah. So we've got A and D,
yes,
and they both have the same transitions, but one is cheaper.
yep. If I may.
Yeah.
When we started the process, we started out with 6 options. Option D didn't come on board until partway through the process.
Okay.
And we'd actually already eliminated option A before we even saw D. D came about as a discussion point of another what if scenario, so to speak. Option A was primarily limited because of the boundary issues and the concerns over equities of the schools. And that was really the biggest driving force. The consensus is that as much as people say they want neighborhood schools, when you start dividing a community up, it gets a little hairy. And so the committee as a whole felt that transitions was a more comfortable and palatable option in our minds. And so that's where that started. So again, A was eliminated pretty early in the process along with C1 and C3, and then D came in towards the end. And the general consensus is that B is our recommendation right now. D is something that we would okay with if that was the good from an educational standpoint, because one of the concerns with B is a school of 4K and K.
The other
Yeah,
part
yeah.
that they had also
Peter,
Peter,
discussed.
one thing about D that's really attractive is that everybody in Cottage Grove would have children in the new school.
Yeah.
So there's a major difference I can spot right away between A and D. And in A, half of the people in Cottage Grove are at a brand new school, half are in a remodeled old school. And in D, everyone would have an opportunity to be in the new school who lives in Cottage Grove. And to me, when I looked at A and D is more palatable for a number of reasons.
Okay. All right, so yeah, I wanted to, for your second, I understand why B is chosen. I just, for this second option, I'm wondering why there's, you know, you favor
That
one
was
or the other.
primarily it.
Carrie hit that.
My second question, if I may, is the, it's the sort of the priority maintenance needs. Are any of those currently budgeted on our plan? This, I think, that's also, I mean, because we've got, for example, school roofs at the high school is in our plan right now.
So anything that we are taking care of in this summer capital is not incorporated.
It's not.
So none of those things, so this is all additional to what we have on our
That's what
capital
we were
plan
told.
right now.
Yes.
Gotcha, okay, thank you.
So Susan Fox, did you want to?
Well, I just wanted to add to that comment about D, because as Jason just said, and I'm not sure if the import of that comment registered on people, but one of the reasons D was suggested was because a few people raised a concern about having such a limited school of
That's
pre-K, K,
Mhm.
saw it as sort of too much of a preschool. Some people didn't see that as a problem, but some people thought, well, maybe, you know, if you started out with two schools where it was pre-K two, the kids are younger, maybe dividing it would be more dividing the community would be more palatable. That was part of the thinking. So I think if
Yeah.
I'm correct,
Right.
by listening to the
Yeah.
conversation, that's what I was picking up. And so that could potentially work, whereas to divide all of 1-5 would be just too much of an issue.
Yeah,
for
we
the
even
boundary.
actually asked Principal Hazley, you know, that question of,
Right.
of how does what's a 4K K school, how does that feel and look? And the response we got was that it'll work just fine, but the committee still felt that, again, it could be too many young kids in one spot.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily our decision to discuss, because we don't have that knowledge and expertise.
I also want to reiterate to the board is that while we've come to consensus regarding this preliminary recommendation, there is a lot of discussion between the 20 and now 19 members that that wasn't always consensus. We still have very strong discussions and viewpoints to be able to see that. But one of the things is that we have committed ourselves to work together, and as key things come up that we can agree on, all right? Because as Patty said, this is a really preliminary. When it gets down to the nitty-gritty and the priorities, then you will see this committee really each come out and say their piece and to be able to do it. And I can speak for myself because I've worked on school committees and closings for many, many years. And so what I did was I spent the last 2 months since being on the committee looking at every referendum in our conference and what their communities had to go through. And were we following the same blueprint for those successful referendums? In addition, I worked on the referendum for Madison College, and I know how much work it went in to get that one, because it's even a much larger one that we're asking the community to go for. And I think as I found out information, that my responsibility, I felt, was to raise those questions to the professionals and to Dan, and to keep on pushing for those answers. Just like every other committee member had concerns that we continue to push for. So while this is a preliminary recommendation, and you see 5 members here looking like we all voice total consensus, let me tell you, we are as divided as you are.
again, having gone to all but one of the meetings, this was just an incredible, impressive thing. And to have addressed the board's kind of directive to you, for you to do this study has been amazing. So I think there are a couple of things. One is, I know there's at least one other member of your committee here, and I don't know, I know this is a presentation thing, but I think it's important to invite all the members of the committee who are here tonight to have a chair up here. And John may not wanna do that, but his value in that committee, understanding you probably didn't speak until that last time. You're fine back there.
Thanks for the invitation, Susan, but not tonight.
Okay.
These
One of
are
the
my
reasons I'm mentioning that is that there were members on that committee who'd previously been on the previous committee and have a little more of that history. The other thing is, to understand that what we did was we directed the committee to do this review and study. So when there's a question, we shouldn't be answering the question about how we feel. Our role is to listen respectfully to you, so if we're not doing that, feel free to talk back and tell us something. Then my real question, well, I guess it's a question, is I was just, and I hadn't seen this before, cause we just got it, and I think it's actually page 12. It's hard because our pages aren't numbered and the slides aren't numbered. But you get to toward the very end, and I have page 12. It says preliminary cost maintenance. And that slide confused me because you had talked about capital improvements, and then all of a sudden there's a slide on remodel, and it's titled remodel. And then there's a slide on maintenance. So it would be helpful for me to have you explain that piece so that we can better understand it and the community actually sees this document, because I think it's confusing.
Yeah.
The other thing is I really want your input on, so when you hear language, and again, Joe and John have this history, but I'm looking at language for Glacial Drumlin, which to a lot of the community feels like a brand new school. Especially when you have a community from one community that walks in there and sees it and is used to being in other environments. And to hear people say, well, then everybody gets a new building, and I'm thinking, no, they don't. This is a unified school district. We're meeting the capacity needs in a section of the school district, but you're right, a bunch of kids are not getting a new building. So it's all about meeting their needs, and I appreciate that you guys have been very, very good about that. But when you start, when the presentation, and it wasn't you guys presenting, started to be about renovations, capital improvement, whatever repair, whatever you wanna call it, I understand repairs and people understand the root. But when you say things like, looking at collaborative concepts, furniture never purchased, open these areas up more, areas we've never used the way they were supposed to be used. It's one reason we didn't hire that architect. You know, I think it's going to be critical for us to hear from you when you talk about capital improvements, and we're talking about $88 million. I need to know what you think is compelling. Starting with your rewrite on your report is fabulous. So it's up to you guys.
I'll start for you, Susan. So the difference between the remodel and the capital improvement as we're looking at it on this. The remodel is the section that goes back to the light blue, the dark blue, and the orange. So that is the proposed enhancements to each one of the individual facilities that the gentleman walked us through. So that's why it's laid out, each one of those, the light blue, the
Is
dark.
that included in capital improvements?
No,
It's
the
a
capital
separate category.
improvement is the
Separate category.
maintenance number. So that maybe should say
Okay.
maintenance
Okay.
instead of capital improvement.
The priority need.
The priority maintenance needs is the 16.4 million.
Okay, and the remodel is to make it better.
To make it better, so
Clean
that
up
was
the
like the
code,
corridors,
right.
the,
Whatever is needed to make that school the best learning environment. And again, what we have been told that these are preliminary numbers. Now, we don't have to accept every remodel, every school being able to say, extend that, do this, do that, you know, we're looking at first, what are some of the options of what is really needed, and it came out clear because of additional capacity needs. And we've even had some discussion, not a lot, but what if we even had the board change, you know, the student class size? What would that do for capacity, right? They said, we can get back to that later. Well, I'm gonna wait, and I'm gonna keep Dan and all these other folks online to say, what if we raised it 1 or 2, right? How much more of a change would we need to have in additional classrooms or additional costs? Because again, those are discussions that other people have had, not among us. One of the other things is really looking at key transitions and academic needs and priorities to be able to go back to that, to make sure that we are going to be schools of the future. I looked at McFarland and other schools. They're doing virtual, you know? Now, the results of the virtual school are not very good, but they have really cut back on their building needs and a lot of other things. So again, do we look at what the future brings out in terms of building capacity, meeting additional capacity, and giving the school district the best that we can do? I will say that for all of us, and anybody else can agree, we are as concerned as you are about the dollar for every single person. We have children and grandchildren in the school district who are not big earners. They are here because of the school district or the sports or the academics. But we also know that they cannot afford some of these huge things that have been brought to us. And we're going to be really diligent about that.
To address your question about Glacial Drumlin, a couple of things there. I think we did talk a lot about Glacial Drumlin and the weird empty spaces that you see when you go in there. And I think it's the desire of the committee to make that space usable again. And so that's what the desired renovation there is, to take this weird empty space right now and make it something that is functional and usable. Second, the things he talked about, the cafeteria. You know, those of us with young kids that eat lunch at like 7:15 in the morning, I know that's an exaggeration, but you know, the number of lunch lines they run through there is ridiculous. And so that, you know, that remodel to the cafeteria is absolutely needed because it's not conducive to our students who are eating lunch very early or very late in the day. So it's really, yes, we agree it's a beautiful school, but there are things we can do to make it better and to make it more usable and to open up some of that space so that it can meet those growing capacity needs as we move forward, in addition to taking the fifth
Did you
graders out.
consider renovation to the gym, which when you pull out the bleachers, you can't even use the field?
Yeah, we talked about that, and that's part of that orange area that was beside it. So if they could even, you know, create some of those additional spaces off of the gym to utilize for either fitness space or something else, that some of the gym units could use it.
But it doesn't
The problem
change.
is it's like landlocked, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's what we learned about school construction. You shouldn't put a gym in the middle. That's my big takeaway. Don't put a gym in the middle.
And like Pat said, it really helped when you went through the school tour. You know, I've been in most of the schools, but I was really surprised, even in 3 years, the changes that some of these schools have, and certainly in 5 years. And I know there's a lot of folks in Monona that haven't been in every elementary school in Cottage Grove. When they think of Cottage Grove, you know, they think, oh, well, the school is old. But it isn't old anymore. They've had renovations, they've had changes. Same thing with Taylor Prairie. I think the committee chosen had, each of us have strengths that we bring to the discussion. And that I can value each of my fellow members on that committee when they ask the questions. Because they're all bringing maybe a viewpoint that I don't see. And just the fact that they bring it up or ask for the questions. Now, we are going to be much more discerning, I think, in the next phase.
Thank you all for all of your hours and hours and hours spent on this. We really, really appreciate it. And a lot of this we knew when we asked this committee to start looking at these things. So the one slide that it was a surprise to me that was added is the one that's about the consequences of doing nothing. And I wasn't anticipating that to come back from this committee, because when we asked this committee to do this work, we asked you, we know that this is something that needs to happen. So could you talk a little bit more about why it was so necessary among yourselves? These were people who agreed to work on a bricks and mortar, look at the district and how to expand capacity. I was surprised that there was so much discussion of whether or not the basic charge to the committee was even valid, sort of. And so I'm just curious, knowing that it was important enough that rose to the level of you putting in a presentation back to us, how you're feeling, where the community sentiment is on this, and if you had to gauge awareness of this topic, how that would influence our work as we go out to survey the community about this topic, whether we still have people on a scale of 0 to 100, how far to the 0 end are they of thinking this isn't even really necessary to be doing right now,
Yeah.
versus where I was sitting at, which was like 101 over, oh my God, because I don't want to be tacking trailers on to the outside of buildings and then look like we weren't planning ahead properly. So it's years at this. So I just see some nodding, and could you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Well, I think we all got our property tax bills, you know, right at the beginning, you know, when we were doing this, and so we went, you know, and that's absolutely not school district related, but we, you know, we passed a referendum, and that's in people's brains, like, oh, we passed a referendum, now my tax bill just went through the roof. Not related. I mean, if you read it, it tells you what your you know, the operational referendum was, but from the people that I talked to who haven't spent 14 hours, you know, working on this, that's what we see. So people, I think people that I've talked to, friends that I've talked to in Monona certainly, because they don't have kids that are getting crammed, you know, into their into school when it was still under capacity. So it's, well, what happens if we do nothing? You know, what happens if I think we've gone back and forth and talked. It's just going to be a really hard sell, and it's going to be a lot of, I think a lot of us going out and making sure that we're answering questions too, and not just saying, oh yeah, it's great, good luck. You know, they're putting a sign in our front yard. It's gonna be a really, really hard sell, and I think that we wanted to make sure that it was really clear that this doing nothing isn't an option. I mean, it's not a good option.
Right. Well, and
for
we
the
acknowledge
families.
it's a bad time. I think, you know, we talked about the Walmart situation. We talked about tax bills, Foxconn. We talked about, you know, the city of Monona and some of the challenges that they're facing with some of their municipal asks that are going to be coming up soon. And then as the committee members were out doing some community outreach with our friends and neighbors, you know, a lot of the first things people said were, excuse my language, I'll be damned if I'm building another school. We certainly don't. I'm glad you're on that committee because you'll set them straight that we don't need a school. And then I would walk them through the data. I'm like, actually, you know, we do. So I think it was our feeling that there's still strong community sentiment, that there's a lack of awareness of this issue. And so it was for the board as much as the community that's hearing this presentation today, that, and a challenge to the board that, you know, the survey is important and the community outreach portion is going to be tremendously important to making sure this is a success.
And Carrie, I think some of this too came as we were ending our work as a committee too, and knowing that it is going out to the community in the form of a survey. It's important for them to be able to not only have this information, but to be able to look at it. Okay, if we go this way, these are the costs, the consequences. We can't afford it. No, but to look at it from a broader perspective too, as it has already been shared.
Yeah.
And I shared when the community, when my daughter was in 3rd grade, and the school board decided to do nothing about the windows at NICHOLS. In her 3rd grade room in the wintertime, she wore her coat because the windows were so drafty they frosted up. She had a class size of 30. Now, many of us in the committee said we went to elementary school with class size of 25 or 30. But that doesn't mean it has to be done again, or it's the best way to look at it. But that was clearly a point back then where they did nothing because the cost to fix the windows seemed so astronomical. We had no community surveys, nothing. The school board just made that choice. And then you had the consequences to pay. So now I'd say is you have to do something. And the critical maintenance work, as Patty said, will never go away. It will just get worse. And we cannot afford even one disaster in any of our buildings from any of those maintenance costs to be able to do it. Because one disaster, whatever it is, for public safety, could ruin us as a community and as a school district. So we're asking you to think about all of these slides. But the do nothing is something that if you came back to us, we probably would be really, really upset. I would be really, really upset that you got to that point.
There's a lot of
reason to
hours
do
in those
nothing.
meetings to get, like, I think those of us who've been at this for, you know, years now, were there. And so this was an interesting thing for me to observe how many hours of discussions and meetings it took to get this very well-intentioned and dedicated group there. And I'm curious then proportionally what it would take to get our community there as a whole. And that's why I'm like really
I
interested.
think the survey will be
tell us.
really important. I think just to make sure there's really good detailed information that's going out when you're asking the
That's
survey,
right.
because that's gonna be a lot of people's first exposure to it.
Because when the gentleman came and said, the public wants to say something, the public has something to say, if you only put 10 questions out, you know, you get a lot of people in, but you put out 50 and there's like 4 questions that pertain to me, and you ask me, they have a reason to answer it and to be able to do it. So every survey I looked at of every school district in the Badger Conference, the surveys were as long as we got as an example, 15 pages. And the response from community, I was shocked. I was shocked. They were getting 30, 40, 50% back of these multi pages. That told me something that we better do a good job with our community, because if we don't get to hear even the smallest quiet voice, we could lose because they're gonna come back and say, you didn't listen to us, you didn't hear our voice.
That's part of what goes into why you see that inaction slide in there, is we
Yeah.
talked about putting this presentation together. You know, one of the things we realize is that this is a public document. And so this will be the first time that a lot of people will be able to see this data, this information. But this slide clearly states, you know, if we don't do anything, here's the consequences, and here's what you're gonna have to deal with. So I think that's pretty key. You know, the other thing, I'm gonna go back to what Joe said a little bit about the board changing policy on student class sizes and things. That's beyond our scope. You know, we ask the questions, but that's not for us to decide on what the impact that will have. Hopefully that's part of the discussions you guys will have. Hopefully some of these things will also lead you to include questions on, if we do nothing in your survey, if we do nothing, are you willing to put up with A, B, and C, or put up with this consequence, that consequence? Because I think some of those things will have big impacts as you're filling out that survey also.
Well, and I think is another possibility, rather than doing the whole thing or doing nothing, doing more of a phase-in. I mean, I think my understanding was from the committee that that's also something the board really needs to talk about is, you know.
It's not all or nothing.
Right,
Right.
it's setting priorities.
Again,
and you've
beyond
done
our
an
scope.
excellent job of outlining all the needs.
Yes,
so the scope
but
comes
yeah,
back to
that's
it.
beyond our scope. I think
Right.
I think we've talked a little bit about that, but not enough that we could make a consensus, give you a consensus
There are
on
many
that.
ways to put out
Yeah.
information, whether you do it in phases, project 1, project 2, project 3, and,
Yeah.
you know, you talk about what is truly needed, and then, you get the committee looking at those priorities. And I will go back to what one of the public speakers said. I think it is imperative that this information be front and center on your website immediately. People are beginning to hear backdrops, and if they can't find it, and it was really difficult for me to find some things, and I've been in the committee, it will be frustration, but they will turn it to a negative as to what we are trying to do. So put it out there, put the report out, that it's right there, that people can find, and be ready to answer the calls, be ready to ask the committee what we can do for you, or vice versa. But it bothered me when I heard the public speakers say they got no response from officials. I work in an area where that's the number one thing I beat into my husband's head every day. If somebody calls you, they have a problem. You have a responsibility to answer. You have a staff, you have people to do it for you. Do it. Because if you don't do it, you will never know, but they've told all the other people, and it will make a difference.
Dean and then Susan?
I'm glad you discussed the class size issue.
Oh, yeah.
As chair of the personnel committee and dealing with things, teachers particularly and so forth, one of our, there's short term or there's a teacher shortage, or at least quality teachers. And one of our goals as a board and committee is to attract and retain the teachers. And one of the, and we're just beginning to look at it, but we have some data. We kind of have a general idea of the salaries, and we have fringe benefit data which have been supplied. But one of the places where we invest heavily, where money could, if we didn't do it, money could go to the salaries, is our class sizes. That's beneficial to education, parents like it, but it's also something that is an attraction and retaining issue, and I think it's a commodity that can be sold to parents, and particularly those in the schools. But it's an important factor of maintaining that, and there's we could get into a lot of other factors here other than that, but I think that's a fact that ought to go in, that issue, or in one or more ways ought to go into your surveys, make sure it gets in there.
Can I just add one thing as a follow-up to Carrie's previous question? When you go to surveying, one thing that I think there's a huge misunderstanding in the community about is open enrollment and the impact that it has. So I would advise that people are really clear, because that's the first thing that a lot of people brought back was, well, just stop letting everyone else in and you'll be fine. And so again, those enrollment projection numbers excluded open enrollment. But that was something I would just recommend to the board that you really communicate strongly on, because I think that's highly misunderstood in the community.
Thank you.
It's interesting, Patty, that's exactly what I was gonna talk about. So, I'm gonna kind of ask all of you to be huge advocates for getting the information that you've seen, you've looked at, and you've used out there to the public. Because I'm not sure, I certainly felt in relation to the information that you guys have been working on, we could have done better. So, as a public member coming to watch your meetings, it was extremely difficult for me not to be able to see the presentation that was going to be presented that night and what you were going to work on, so that I was seeing it as it happened. So I wondered how you guys were coping with that. So I'm going to really, really encourage each and every one of you to make sure the information that you used and you thought was important, whether it's resources on configurations, whatever, is somewhere where other people can find it. So that as a board member I can say, it's out there, it's up. I also want to really thank you tons for however you did this, the rewrite of the report. I was kind of crushed to see that, and I didn't see it till I walked in the door. And I do check at 3 o'clock in the afternoon just to see what's posted, because it surprised me, because I had gone to every meeting except one. It did not sound like you or look like you, or it appeared to give, and maybe it's just me, a picture of what you had done. This one, this new one does. I feel tons more comfortable. So I want you guys, whatever comes forward and the resources that you use. So for instance, one of the things I asked to be posted was for you guys, was the policy on class size and open enrollment. And I still don't, I'm not sure that's up there. Anyway, Obviously, I'm not making the dent, so if you ask for it and you say, this is what we use, this is what was important to me to understand. And I watched you struggle through that night of open enrollment, not understanding it. That sheet that says, how many did we take this year? How many did we take last year? And how many did we take the year before? And you can see, somebody said, yeah, but you just took 50 kids, 100 kids at the high school. I said, so if you could help with that, that would be huge.
At our last meeting, when we got the bullet points on one sheet, as to the preliminary recommendations and the board, I know I was surprised, and we had a good discussion, said, we need more. We really put the screws to the superintendent, to our consultants, and from there, we give, a lot of suggestions, and then another smaller committee met to rewrite and put the input in. We met again to look at the new slides and to be able to do that. And to be honest, I was surprised at how quickly this final report came out in the way that I would think that not only us who had to do the presentation, but I did ask the superintendent that the whole committee be able to see this before they see the next meeting, because this is what we wanted. This is how we felt. But we felt that, brevity was not what you needed at this point. And so I know that I pushed, and I think as the rest of us all pushed. And so I do have to say thank you to Dan and to the committee, to the professionals who listened, and Joyce, who had to rewrite, and also asking the question. We also had to make sure, and this is, when Jared talked about that operational, we were clear. We said, you're going to have to go back for a second operational after you maybe do this referendum. Are you crazy? We need to be sure that they don't think that when you go back to that operational continuation, it doesn't include these costs. And I said, we need to see what they would be. And there was really a loud voice to say, we can't even talk about a new school unless you bring up the operational and these impacts. Because if they're so out of line, we're not even going to consider it. We'll get back to the nitty-gritty and figure out what we have to do.
And I have to say, I so appreciate what you guys did. I cannot thank you enough. I was sitting there when the agreement was made, and it was kind of like, as a committee, you just stepped back and you said, what is going on here? There appeared to be consensus that report, the previous one, they were gonna rewrite that. It wasn't clear who was gonna do that. It didn't look like it was gonna be you guys, so it was wonderful you guys stepped up. And then they were gonna send it to everybody by email, and that there were 12 of you, of 20 at the meeting. And if you had input on it, just send it. Otherwise, there was gonna be an assumption that it was okay. You weren't gonna get back together and say, I read this is really good. So, to have the community really feel the confidence in the work that you've done, I think they wanna hear that voice. And this is what I heard tonight.
Thank you. Other questions? Carrie?
I just have one last one, which was, someone earlier, I had made the note that Patty mentioned earlier about the time to act is now. And I just really appreciated that you said that when you were talking about this. And someone else said if we came back and said, thank you very much, we're gonna let this sit on the shelf, that wouldn't be acceptable. So I'm just wanting to revisit what in particular got you to the point of seeing the urgency of this. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because on our documents that we have tonight, the other one is dated 2015. And when I got that one, I was at the point that I think many of you are at tonight. And the time to act is now, and it's not acceptable to not be actively pursuing this. And my fear is that we'll have this one from 2015, this one from 2018, and when my kid graduates in 2021, it'll be, there'll be another go with this. And so if you had an opportunity to try to convey a sense of urgency now, so that, what was it that was the turning point for you?
The red lines are getting really close.
Yeah,
Okay.
this chart is It's it. I mean, that tells it for everybody, how dire the situation is and how quickly it's approaching. You know, because depending on what school you're in, you've got kids that are in, they may tell you that that school's big, but if you don't have anybody in a different school, or, you know, that school's full, you may not realize that another school is full or nearing capacity. And, you know, so this puts it in, for me at least, it put it in right in front that 3 schools are or gonna be over capacity within the next 5 years.
And then it
And
takes a
that's-
certain number of years to have the construction
Correct.
budgeted,
Yeah, you've gotta
approved,
be, you've gotta be working ahead of
implemented,
that
and the doors
5 years
open.
because,
And
yes.
like, we're now within that window in my mind, you know, or
I-
getting really,
yeah,
really
because
close.
You start talking about how long it'll, you know, take to build, it's, you know, 12 months to 24 months, somewhere in that range would be my assumption. So you start backdating things in, and when your first school starts going, the first 2 schools are really over or at capacity in 1920, and then they're over at beyond that, you're already there.
Well, and that doesn't include the open enrollment, like we were given this when we got the projection, and these are all over, I mean, with including open enrollment, they're already
Yeah.
over,
Already
I
over.
mean, 3 schools are already over it, so it's, to me, that was the most, it's, oh, well,
Yeah, and we spent a lot of time going through the projections, you know, just as you guys got a full-blown presentation. You know, we went through those projections and carefully talked about, you know, the fact that it is board policy and you could, we based everything off of not including anything in open enrollment, because you could, you know, obviously change the policy and not accept any open enrollments based on that because of capacity issues and stuff. So that's why everything that we've looked at and talked about is just what they're projecting for the 2 communities and for this district as a whole. There's nothing that has to do with, you know, the students that are in today carry forward in those projections, so you'd have those open enrollment students that carry forward. But it doesn't include adding another one next year, you know? So it's those, so that's how those numbers work, and that's what makes this so eye-opening.
But going back to your question, Carrie, of doing nothing, it is not our responsibility to make the decision to do nothing. It can be a recommendation. It is the school board's, okay? And if you go back and to say you got the report in 2015, you were on the school board in 2015, and you did not, you as a member of that board at that time, did not implement any or all or some of that, the responsibility then lays on you as a school board member.
Amen.
You know,
We
and-
went to operational referendum instead,
and-
is what we did.
Right.
And that was a distinct choice of this board at that time,
At
and so
that
now
time.
the question
So,
is,
to be able
can
to
we
look
take
at it.
action on the facilities?
But let me tell you, there is also confusion within the community when they only hear referendum, okay? So we had lots of questions say, well, they just got a referendum to spend all this much money for the next 19 years, right? What are they doing with it? Well, you better be able to answer that question to the community, what you're doing with it, and when you have to go back to it to be able to put it on top of some other facility referendum or an additional operational referendum. You know, you as our representatives have a huge burden to learn, to decipher, to take, and make sure you communicate it well, you know, because it's a hard sell.
I think the survey is going to play a huge role in this, a lengthy survey to get people thinking, talking with each other, providing feedback, and I think that would contribute to the urgency of moving forward. So I'm looking forward to that process. I think it's very important, and I from what I've learned so far, I think it's going to be done very well.
One of the things that, you know, that this recommendation does is that it addresses this enrollment increase for the next 20 years. So I think that's also got to be clearly stated, that this is not looking at just getting by for the short term for 5 years. This, you know, making this investment now potentially, whatever size it is, whether it's, even if it's just the capital needs, is going to help address things down the line for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you know, as things play out. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've come back with this option, is because we see it as being, this might be the last time you can get this through, and how do we solve that for the long haul?
this one's just a quick one. Would you guys also, as you decide, or whatever input you're having on the presentation that's gonna be done for the public hearings, 22nd and 27th, would you make sure, so how many of you can read that?
It's really difficult. We've asked numerous ways. I mean, this is one of the reasons why the hard
Could you,
copy
again,
is
so
really
have I,
hard.
and it's not making a dent, so if you as a committee would say, we're going out, we're gonna be doing this, we wanna make sure that the, so for instance, if the presentation we had today, lots more paper, but for those who wanna see it, you put one slide on each page, and you don't have to do it with all of them, it's just the number of slides. This one has been like this for 6 months. So they've modified it to a different grid, but if people are asking about a specific school, this is the only place you're gonna see it. And the other one is the open enrollment, because you're right, that question comes up. So if you guys would kind of document the things that you think are gonna be critical documents for those events in putting information out, it would be helpful to have them. So, I mean, I'm on the senior foundation board and they can't read this.
They can't read it.
And if you want them to vote with you, they have to be able to understand.
So, one last comment, you know, having the variety and the experience and the extensive community members on our committee, and the value of people like John, who worked at the building of Taylor Prairie and the new schools and those different things, is we have to realize that what you choose now and when it gets built, if you really don't look at capacity numbers, you know, additional capacity, we cannot afford to have a school complete and at its capacity, you know, or built with a gym in the middle that you cannot build around. We are, you know, if these are things that you want the committee to look at more or criticize the professionals, I'm sure there are members on the board that will do, on the committee that will do it. But I think that's one of the things you have to look at, and we have to be aware of. There is capacity, there is the financial part of it, the burden part, the academic part. But in no way can you not plan for that future. We've gone down the other way, and it wasn't very pretty.
Anything further? All right. A hearty thank you.
I feel like we should
Thank
clap
you
or
very
something. Thank you for all of you.
Because we're done and you can move on.
Awesome.
Yeah.
No,
Thank you.
so good. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for all your work.